Good afternoon, everyone. For those that I haven't met, I am Yuri Chumak, and I am the moderator of today's webinar. The title of the webinar is Year-End Estate Planning. And that, according to a search that I did, is the process of reviewing your financial situation and making any necessary changes to your estate plan. This may include updating your will, trusts, power of attorney, and beneficiary designations. It may also involve gifting assets to loved ones or charities. Now, I am a member of the board of directors of Ivan Franko Homes, and I'm also a member of the IT committee of the board. And by training, I'm a lawyer practicing with firms in Toronto for over 15 years. This seminar was organized by the communications committee of our home. And by way of housekeeping, I wanted to let you know that everyone has been muted, and there will be an opportunity for questions after our two speakers have finished their presentation. Now, if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A section of Zoom, which is at the top, or in some cases at the bottom of your screen. And you can post your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. Now, this session is being recorded, so it can be shared with others who aren't able to attend today, and the materials will be made available to participants. Other resources and materials will be made available to you, to all participants, including a link to something called the Gift Tabulator, which I'm sure we'll hear about later. Now, I would like to introduce our two speakers, and I will introduce them both and then let our first speaker take it away. Our first speaker is Craig Svistun. Craig has over 20 years of experience in the wealth management industry, and over his career, he has held leadership roles in a variety of organizations that have focused on meeting the needs of both individual and institutional investors. He is the lead portfolio manager and founder of Lexicon Financial Group, which has a relationship with Raymond James Investment Counsel. Craig has extensive experience writing and speaking about issues related to wealth management. He holds the Chartered Investment Manager professional designation, among others. Craig has been a member of the Development Advisory Committee for Prosper Canada, a national charity in Canada. Our next speaker, or second speaker, is Bill Petruk. Bill founded Funding Matters in 1997 and has worked across a number of sectors and is known for his ability with multidisciplinary and complex initiatives in raising funds for capital and endowment projects. He has worked with a variety of populations, including the Ukrainian Canadian community, First Nations, homeless community, Indigenous communities, as well as multi-ethnic populations, other multi-ethnic populations. He's worked in a number of disciplines, including health, post-secondary, independent schools, social services, employment, cultural heritage, economic development, and green energy. This combination has supported the work of Funding Matters in achieving positive change in programs, organizations, and systems. He regularly works with private sector, government, and voluntary sector organizations. Bill is a graduate of the University of Toronto and a lifelong learner of how to help individuals give philanthropically to benefit society. And with that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Craig for his presentation. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you so much, Yuri, and thanks to everybody for taking time to go through this presentation. A little bit of housekeeping. We're really here to answer questions that you might have. We're going to walk through a very brief agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about what is estate planning and how estate planning and charitable giving can be interconnected. Then I'll turn the presentation over to Bill, who will walk you through some real world examples of why, while giving is important, how you give is equally important, because there are some major tax considerations that many Canadians are not aware of, that how they choose to support charities and how they gift can have a major impact on supporting the charities that they wish to support. So that's sort of the rough agenda. I think we'll be 15, 20 minutes. leave plenty of time for questions. So if you do have questions, just as a reminder, you can use the question and answer section on the Zoom, which, as Yuri said, is either at the top or the bottom of the screen that you're going to see. So let's just start right at the beginning. What is an estate plan? And when we think about estate planning in the context of what it means for individual families, it is the transition of assets to the next generation. And by doing it properly, you can potentially preserve family harmony and avoid excess taxation. There are rules around how estates are transferred in Canada and the tax impacts of transferring an estate. And the better you understand the rules, the more you're able to get those rules to work in your favor, in line with those things that you choose to support. And it all begins with having a proper and up-to-date will. But 60% of Canadians don't have an up-to-date will. And I think this is a fairly high percentage of Canadians that don't have a will at all. And I can't underscore this enough, the importance of having a will. Even a basic will makes life so much easier for those that follow you. I'll give you a quick example. My father unfortunately passed away in May of this year. And when we asked him, as he was nearing the end, where the copy of the updated will was, he didn't have a copy of the updated will. He hadn't updated his will in several years. And in fact, the executor named in his will had predeceased him. That causes the ripple effects of that decision of not naming a new executor. He didn't understand how much that would affect what we were able to do with his estate. None of the wishes that he set out in his legally binding will have yet to be executed against, because it is not a properly constituted and up-to-date will. So it's important that if you want your wishes to be adhered to once you're gone, you have to make sure you write them down, and you have to make sure that you keep it up to date. And unfortunately, most Canadians just aren't doing a good enough job of keeping the up-to-date will. And it's important because if you die without a will, you're said to have died. The term is intestate. And that means that you've left behind no instructions for how the assets and property that you've accumulated over a lifetime are to be divided and distributed. And if you don't leave instructions about how those assets are to be divided and distributed, the beneficiaries of your estate have no say in the matter. The only person who has a say in the matter is the government. The government has rules in place that gets to decide what happens to any property that's left in your estate. And that's not what anybody wants. People don't work a lifetime to accumulate assets, to see tax inefficiency, to see less money go to their beneficiaries, and to see the government really take control over what happens. So if you don't want the government interfering in your life, the best thing to do is to have a will, write it down, and make sure that you're not dying intestate, and make sure that those instructions are clearly defined and outlined in your will. But when we talk about estate planning in general, we're not talking about just having a will and identifying where the assets go. It's a much more complicated, it can be a much more complicated process, and it requires us to dig a little bit deeper into some issues that many people don't think about when it comes to end-of-life planning. There are financial considerations, which I've shown on the right-hand side of the circle, and there are non-financial considerations. On the financial side, do you have an up-to-date record of all your assets, your investment accounts, your bank accounts, the credit cards that you have, your loyalty program points on? These all form part of your estate. Do you have crypto assets if you're into that sort of thing? Should we be using some sophisticated techniques like estate freezes to reduce the cost of taxes and legal fees upon death? These are all things that are financial in consideration. On the non-financial side, it starts with asking the questions: what is the kind of legacy you want to leave behind for your family and community? Do you want to leave an inheritance to charities that are in line with your values? To whom and to whom do you wish to distribute your assets once you're gone? And then, as I said, in my personal situation, who will the executor be, and are they the right person for the job? We could spend time talking about each and every one of these issues, because there are best practices and techniques that can allow families to really wrap their head around these key issues and come up with a strategy and a plan for dealing with them. Today, we're not going to tackle all of them. That's too much for this session. We're really going to focus on two key aspects. Who and to whom should my assets be distributed? And do I want to leave an inheritance or give to charities that are in line with my values? And those are questions that it doesn't matter how many professional advisors you have in your life. The only person that can answer that is you. And aligning your giving intent with your family or with the charities that are important to you is something that you have to, that's a journey that you have to take, and you can have people beside you that can assist you in that. but it really means digging deep in and understanding what are the causes that are important and how do I want to support them. The proper estate plan, we look at combining these financial and non-financial sides. It really does create the most tax effective way to support your family and those causes that are important. And as I said earlier, how you structure your estate and your charitable giving can have a significant impact on what's left over, but most importantly, a significant impact on what you're able to help others accomplish. You know, part of that process starts before we get to the estate plan, and it starts with even just beginning to identify the charitable causes that are important to you and what you would like to support. And it also involves the process of undertaking, and it could be detailed or it could be very basic, a financial planning exercise to determine how much, you know, if you have philanthropic intent, how much can you afford to give now, and how much could you afford to give in a will? There are many Canadians that don't have a proper financial plan, and they may in fact have more assets at their disposal today that they could use to benefit the charities they choose to support today, rather than waiting until death and leaving an estate gift. So both types of giving are certainly possible. And I think the best way to engage with the charities you want to support is to actually ask them, yeah, how much do you require assets immediately, maybe to fund a certain project or a certain cause that they're working specifically on, and how much do you want to set aside for later, which could be something like an endowment. So understanding the intersection of the financial plan, how much money people have to fund their current lifestyle, do they have excess capital that they could be contributing to charity or contributing to philanthropic causes, can help address that conversation about, is it possible to give now, or is it better to give later, or is it a combination of the two? And so just to sort of wrap up, understanding the rules is really the beginning of the game. Yes, it starts with a will, but it also starts with understanding how you give has an impact on the tax consideration, what you leave behind to your estate, and how you're able to best support the charities that are important to you in your life. So these things all intermingle. And as I said earlier, if you're working with financial professionals, I think it's very, very important that you engage them in this conversation, because they need to be able to guide you or provide you the intelligence to make informed decisions. And I want to just say thank you to the organizers for this session, because I think this is a fantastic start. This is where, for many people, the estate planning begins. It's once people realize that there are better ways, or that they didn't know how to do something. These types of learning sessions is the only way we can encourage people to do the right thing, which is, in my estimation, is to go through the exercise and to start writing some of this stuff down in a will. So those are some high-level remarks. Obviously, we can answer specific questions as they come up. But I want to turn it over to Bill. And if you've listened to Bill before, and if you've worked with the organization, you'll know that he's going to walk through some examples of exactly what I talked about. How you give, getting good at giving is an important part of this topic of conversation. So he's got 4 scenarios that he'll walk you through, and it really does focus and address on this. You know, how do you give now, and how do you give later? And it's just a couple of ideas, but Bill, I'll turn it over to you. And thank you for your time this morning.
Hey, thanks, Craig. And thank you, Yuri, as well, for that introduction and making time. One of the things that people do every year is they give to charity. $10 billion on average gets given to charity in Canada every year. One of the things that why we talk about estate planning is because it's a smart thing to do. Planning out what you have worked hard to accumulate is important, but more important, but also to take into consideration that things are getting a little bit more complex for a number of reasons. One is COVID has kind of been a bit of a wake-up call to a lot of individuals and families around the need to update their will. And there was a significant increase in people going to their lawyers, looking at what they need to do to ensure that whatever they have is treated the way they, according to their wishes. Secondly, is that things are a little bit, and families are a little bit more complex than they were many years ago. there are more complex assets. There are more assets sometimes. A lot of people look at themselves as being cash poor and asset rich. They don't think of themselves, but at the end of the day, the government looks at you as being wealthy, and they benefit when people don't do their planning. And one of the things that we did was we developed an application that shows you the smartest ways to think about incorporating charitable giving as part of your estate planning. And Yvonne Francois has been this in engaging in conversations to show people that they could be utilizing the money that they would be paying out in tax and avoiding that tax by making a charitable gift. Now, when I talked about smart estate planning, there's also smart giving. And the first example that you see is a person who lives in Ontario. They have a taxable income of about $80,000. That would be their tax. That would identify what tax bracket they're in. They may have stocks, mutual funds. They may have registered investments, other property like a cottage or a rental income property. And assume that the value of of the stock holding is $100,000, and they paid $50,000 for it. And we could take a look at the stock market. It's gone down slightly from its highs, but one of the things is that pre-COVID, the stock market is still higher than it was at that point. And when we start to look at this scenario, they've got a $50,000 capital gain. On that $50,000 capital gain, there's a taxable portion of that capital gain. And what I want to show you is that what would happen if they were to transfer in kind $10,000 of shares to their charity. Well, the donation amount would be the same if it were cash or if it were stock, as you can see in the comparison. The tax savings would be identical at $4,292. But the benefit of avoiding taxable income by transferring the shares, they benefit to the tune of just under $1,000, $977. So when you start to take the tax savings plus the tax avoidance on the $10,000 donation, it comes out to less than 50%. And that to a lot of people is a much smarter way to make a charitable gift. Now, on the cash side, the net cost for them is $5,708. It would be the tax savings minus the donation amount. But remember one thing, that when you give cash, you've already paid the tax on that money. So that amount may have been $20,000, but you're doing a $10,000 donation. Whereas with the stock donation, you're actually transferring it pre-tax. So you've avoided the tax on that. And so what we're trying to do is say, if you're thinking about your estate plans and you're thinking about putting something in your will, there may be an opportunity to actually look at starting your philanthropy, your charitable giving, as you do your annual gifts now. And as a year end approaches, this may be something for you to give consideration to. Next
Bill,
slide.
Bill, if I could interject for a second, I think this is something that many Canadians aren't aware of, that they can give securities from their investment portfolio to charities and avoid the tax, as you've said, Bill. From my experience, once people are aware of it, the next question is, well, that sounds like it's difficult to do. Can you just maybe comment on how easy it is for financial professionals to give securities to charities?
Right. So Yvonne Francois, we've received many in-kind donations from mutual funds, from stock that have been transferred. And basically, Yvonne Francois has an account with Ceridian, Raymond James, through Buduchnist. And what they do is they can receive the shares, and at that point, the shares are sold immediately. So to get the true fair market value for those shares for that individual. And then that's put into the account. And from that, the donation receipt is generated for the fair market value for the donation. So not only does the individual get the benefit of avoiding the taxable income. They get the tax savings, and they get a full value for that donation. Now, a clever thing to do, if for the financial advisor for that particular donor, if that were your situation, if you were thinking or so inclined to make a $10,000 donation of cash, the best thing to have done would have been to donate the $10,000 of shares to the charity, to Yvonne Francois, and then replace it with the $10,000 that's in your bank account, therefore improving your average cost basis of your shares as well. It's a lot of information, but you'll see if you want to play around with a gift tabulator, how that can work for you. Craig, do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, we're good.
Are we on the next slide?
Yes.
Okay, so take the scenario of the cash versus asset. Now we want to show the tax minimization. So you'll see there's a tax with no donation. So the tax that the person would have owed would be $10,853 on their $50,000 taxable cap on their capital gain. So then when you start to look at that, one of the things to bear in mind is by making this $10,000 donation, in-kind donation, you get a tax credit of $43.41, and the tax after the donation is $65.61. So you've reduced your tax on your gain, you've made a charitable gift, and it's cost you less than half of what it would have been if you did it in cash. Next. This is one of my favorites. It really speaks to the hard-earned efforts of individuals in their lifetime. So here's a situation where you sit down and you're thinking through your estate plan and all the things that Craig has identified. One of the things when you start to take a tally of what the value of your assets are in your estate, and assume that you live in Ontario, your value of your estate is $500,000. The original cost of the estate, when you actually add everything up, is $200,000. And then you've got a $300,000 capital gain. So on that $300,000 capital gain, you'll see that what quickly gets calculated is the tax. The tax on that $300,000 is going to be $73,815, leaving the heirs $396,225. So what we really want to illustrate here is that if the individual were to make a $50,000 bequest, and a bequest is kind of it's a charitable bequest, they're bequeathing something to charity because these organizations have been important to them. One of the things to bear in mind is that $50,000 bequest will create a tax credit of $20,040. And in the end, it will illustrate that what the heirs will receive from the $500,000 once the taxes are paid and once the bequest is created. So one of the things that we really feel is important in all of that is to get a sense that that bequest is an opportunity to reduce the tax that the individual would normally be paying of $73,815 and reduce the tax to $53,775. Now, there are different ways to look at it. One is we could do it as a percentage, as this is 10% of the estate value. Another way is to leave a specific amount. So say somebody wanted to leave a specific amount, such as $100,000, they could do that. And the third is the one that really interests a lot of people. And if you play around with Gift Tabulator, I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this, is the beauty of eliminating the tax on your estate. How much would I have to give to eliminate the tax to get that tax credit to equal $73,815? And in the end, what do my heirs get from all of that? Because everyone wants to make sure that their heirs are left with as much as possible. But then, you've got the trade-off. How much do you want to leave to the government? And how much would you like to leave to charities that are important to you as part of your estate plan? Next, Craig. Okay, this one is really cool. Okay, so in the past 50 years, every financial advisor has encouraged their clients to invest every year in registered investments, RSPs, and now when they at 71 and a half, they become RIFs. Well, a lot of people are sitting, and I've got a great story about somebody who came to me after a presentation that we had made probably 20 years ago. And she said, want to know something? I've got $12 million in my RIF, and I just can't use the money fast enough. But I've been told that I only have 6 months to live. And I want to find out how I can make a significant contribution to a charity using this RIF, because I know the government's going to take 53% of it. So we started to, this is, at that time, we had not developed Giftabulator to be all the functionality that it has, but we were able to play around with it. And I said, well, how about if you looked at, in this situation, the RIF is, the RSP or RIF is worth $700,000. So we said, how about if you left 30%, and that would result in a charitable bequest of $210,000, reducing the tax from $344,470 to $241,000, and the heirs would still be left with $248,871. And this is a really interesting one. When you're sitting down with your accountant, your financial advisor, your lawyer, and you're starting to look at the different types of assets that you do have, one of the areas that you may have some interest in is to look at something that you're constantly drawing on, but you're getting taxed at the highest rate after 71 and a half years. So this is something to bear in mind, that there are a lot of tools that are available to individuals to actually start thinking about how to incorporate philanthropy as part of their estate planning. And that one is very popular with universities in talking to and hospitals and talking to their patients and alumni and so on, is because it's money that it's funding that just sits there. And it's, in some cases, it's very difficult to liberate without engaging high taxation. So I think I've covered 4 scenarios, but there are many, many, many more scenarios that you can play with at the convenience of in your home or with your family or your friends or your advisors, and see for yourself. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think that it's amazing, how it can be very complicated, because we're talking about a lot of numbers, and the importance of if people do have charitable intent. It's almost like, you have a financial plan, you have an estate plan, you almost need a giving plan to go through all the different options that are available to you. And we haven't touched on it here, but charities are able to receive gifts of life insurance and other types of things. So if people are philanthropic minded, make sure you're working with qualified professionals. And that was actually one of the questions that came in, which is, how do you, and I'll throw it to you, Bill, because you work with a lot of independent people. How does somebody go about finding a financial advisor that aligns with their values, missions, and vision? What do you have for advice for people?
I think what an individual first needs to do is map out what their values, views, interests, and priorities are. And something to bear in mind, this is a family discussion. This is something that I think parents should be bringing to their children. Children should be bringing to their parents, and something that would create a lasting legacy for the family, because the parents may have different interests and priorities than the children. And then when you can kind of pass it down to the grandchildren also play an important role, because the grandchildren are interested in more so in humanitarian aid in Ukraine. The parents may be interested in, secure long-term care, wellness. The parents may have their own interests. So having this type of a family discussion may really open up a lot of really interesting opportunities for dialogue, and it becomes a much more democratic process. And from all of that, there are the chances that the kids and the grandkids and the parents all have different advisors, and it's an opportunity for them to kind of take into account those that really understand their values and views and their priorities. So for themselves, for the family, for the continuation of those relationships, and for the benefit of their community giving.
Yeah, I'm a bit biased because this is obviously the business that I'm in, but I would say if you're working with an independent professional advisor that has not talked to you about tax estate planning, has not talked to you about charitable giving, you should go back and ask them about it. And if you don't like the answers, you should then start looking for alternatives, because financial planning, tax planning, estate planning is so wrapped up in our relationship with money, especially when we talk about giving. In fact, it can be, if you give properly, it's far more, in many cases, it's far more important than any return you might make on an individual investment. When you start incorporating all of these things in an integrated fashion, I think that's the type of professional services you're looking for. Another question that came through, which was, could we provide some things to consider for parents who have many children in planning their wills and asset distribution? And boy, this comes up a lot. I'm on the board of directors for the Canadian Association of Farm Advisors, and this comes up all the time in the context of family farms. And I'll give you a little bit of a scenario. Mom and dad have owned a farm for several years. One child has worked on the farm and is sort of set to inherit and take over the farm. Another child might live in Moncton. Teacher has nothing to do with the farm, and another might live in, let's just say, Victoria, BC, and has nothing to do with the farm. How do you disperse those assets? Because fair and equal is not necessarily the same thing. But I always say that's a decision for the parents to make when it comes to the assets. If they want to leave, splitting the estate equally in that particular case by value is impossible, because you're not going to sever the land and impede the ability of one child to continue to run the farm. So you have to, if equalization is a goal, then you have to look for financial planning solutions to do that. But at the end of the day, it's the person whose assets it are. They've spent the lifetime accumulating it that gets to decide. This is when I talk about preservation of family harmony. If you don't have the conversation with the children while you're living, I can almost guarantee they'll be fighting about it when you're gone. And so the best advice is for the parents to actually figure out what it is they want to do and how they want to disperse their property. I'm talking about liquid assets. Come up with a plan, communicate that to the children. The hard part are those assets that have emotional connections. So I'll give you another quick story. My grandmother passed away several years ago, and she thought it was a great idea to leave the family cottage where we had spent many wonderful summers. She left the family cottage to her 7 grandchildren who lived in 4 different provinces. Well, we at least were smart enough then to know that that was not a workable solution, because there were 4 of us that weren't going to be able to enjoy the family cottage, and we would be jointly owning it and jointly responsible for bills. So sometimes working with a professional that can say, we appreciate where you're coming from, but that's not a workable solution. Or that piece of art, you can't cut it in half and give it to both people. You have to have these difficult conversations. But at the end of the day, it's mom and dad who get to decide. Well, I hope that's helpful, because as much as the estate planning is about tax and ensuring a seamless, to maximize the amount of money that goes to beneficiaries and to charities, it is also about keeping families together. And I think we've all seen examples of how families break apart because, some things just didn't go well, or the fights that ensue after a loved one is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Another question: do families have meetings with a financial planner together? Boy, I wish more families would meet with their professionals all at once. Mm-hmm. That's a great idea, because what it does is it eliminates broken telephone, right? It eliminates the well, we went to the planner and this is what they said. there is an alternate strategy, which is, and I'll use the example, if mom and dad want to go to a planner, if they give the planner permission, or in my case, I'm a portfolio manager, they can give that person permission to share the notes of the conversation with other family members. That's a good solution as well, because then the independent professional, if I'm taking notes for a meeting, I might take out some of the comments that might be a little painful, but really reporting back the substance of the discussion is important, because now all of the family members are on the same page, right?
And Craig, the opportunity of implementing technology for a lot of these families is with the planner, is being able to get them all on the same page at the same time. And I think the planner, it's really incumbent upon the planner to actually initiate that and offer it, to say, look, we're happy to have everybody, jump in on a Zoom and go through it, and we'll carry through some of the discussions and learn about where everybody is coming from.
We've had a question that's come in. It's a very interesting question. It doesn't come up an awful lot, but I think it's coming up more and more. And the question is, what do you do if you have no one who could be an executor? There's been some recent press about why nobody should ever volunteer to be an executor. It's not an easy job, especially with complex estates. There are professional organizations that can act as an executor. So in our instance, we have a relationship with trust companies where we can work with families and appoint a professional executor to that. Now, it costs money. Executors are going to need to be paid. And of course, the more complicated the estate, the more complex. But the money you would save on being a professional executor, or by hiring a professional executor, might have the benefit to the estate might be greater than the cost of employing the professional executor. And depending on every individual circumstances, there are ways where you can use, and I don't sell insurance, so just for full disclosure, but you can take out an insurance policy that would cover the cost of the executor. So you can be paying for your executor, a couple dollars a month instead of a lump sum all at the end. And so there are different strategies for those that either don't have somebody they trust as an executor, or really don't want to, burden a family member or loved one with the executor. And I think it's important too, when you're talking to people, to because the second part of the question is with beneficiaries in the U.S., that's a situation that's starting to get more complicated. To make sure that when you're having a conversation with your professional advisors, that you lay out all these complexities on day one. Because the last thing you want to do is get 3/4 of the way into the discussion and throw a curveball, and somebody doesn't understand how to disperse with a vacation property in the U.S. or multi-jurisdictional tax issues. So I think the starting point is, honestly, is to, write some stuff down, and then, go to a few professionals and say, is this the type of thing that you can help me? I would say most people, if not all people, should be giving you an initial consultation without any costs. Bill, have you seen those trends on the executorship side?
Very much so. All the banks are now having that service available. Trust companies within the banks and on their own. I think that this is an important role for many individuals, especially in instances where families are living abroad. I've got a relative in the United States, and she is on her own, and but she has. We've recommended that she get professional oversight on her estate, so that her wishes can be fulfilled at some point in time. Because jurisdictional issues play a role as well, whether it's provincial and it's the person is in another province or they're in another country. And that's another part of that dynamic, that family dynamic, that you've got blended families, you've got families that live abroad in different areas, and being able to act, and people are busy as well. So to find the time to actually have somebody oversee and support your wishes is very important. And to your point, Craig, you may have that instance where the executor is no longer here, and that poses its own challenges, and in terms of how the estate is going to be administered. and where the will is going to be, and does the person have their will in a safety deposit box? Do you have access to that will in the safety deposit box? If you don't, then you've got another challenge that you're going to be dealing with. So there's so many different things that a professional executor can play in for an individual, especially where there are jurisdictional issues involved.
I guess on that, can a family lawyer be an executor to an estate?
Yeah.
I'll give my perspective. I mean, you want to avoid any kind of a conflict of interest
Right.
anytime you're doing these things. So that's a question that whether they could or whether they are technically able to do it or not, I actually don't know the answer to.
Yeah.
I've been asked to be executors for clients' estates in the past, and I've said no.
Yeah.
It's not our core competency. It's not what we do. And so we would recommend in that case, if they don't have anybody, they seek out a professional. But don't underestimate the value of having a family lawyer working directly with the executor. That's very important.
Right.
And Bill, you mentioned something that I think is worth, and I'll go back to my father's example. When my father was, was kind of nearing the end, he told us that his most recent will was in his safety deposit box at his bank, just as the example you used. It wasn't. It was in the safe at home, which is a small thing. But one of the services that many professionals will do, whether it's a lawyer, an accountant, or portfolio manager such as myself, is we have many clients that ask us to keep a copy locked in our offices, so that should something happen, we have a list of all of the assets, not only that we're managing, but that they have. It's just then the family knows where to go to get access to all that information.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, a question. Do you know any statistics on the Canadian charities that are most frequently receiving donations from estates, or is it kind of all across the board?
Really interesting. It's not a number that would be terribly large as a percentage. So consider that Craig's number of 60% of Canadians do not have a current will or an estate plan. Of those that do have a current will, only 4% actually incorporate a charitable bequest. So all the efforts in terms of educating people about why having a charitable bequest might be a viable option for them in terms of giving back, because all you're really using primarily are your tax dollars to make that donation, to make that bequest. So the objective has been to actually help increase the number of bequests for organizations. And, in Yvonne Franco's case, we've incorporated a sample bequest form so that you can actually go and take a look at it and sit down and think about it. But more importantly, still do not do this without having a discussion with your accountant, your financial advisor, or your lawyer, because they can play a very important role, as they have played for not only Yvonne Franco, but other organizations in our community. And this has been the numbers are getting larger because the size of the estates are getting larger, and people are starting to, feel that, well, I'm not getting my name on a plaque from CRA for giving them, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on my final tax bill or on my current tax bill if I were to sell an asset. But I can create something and pay it backwards. Because that's what we're really looking at, is how can people be thanking those who have made a difference for them in our community. And this is a nice way to do it, and either do it in their name or do it in their family's name. So we are encouraging people to consider having these conversations, but that's why we've got these tools like Giftabulator that actually allow you to play around and see for yourself how you can benefit from this, and for your family and for the community as a whole.
If I could just add to that, Bill, when you look at the charitable sector, and I'm reading off of another screen, which is why I'm looking to the side, in Canada, established charities still receive the lion's share of donations. 80% of the charities in this country receive less than $500,000 in annual revenue. So where are the estate donations going? If those trends hold, they're going to the larger charities. And I'm not suggesting that the larger charities are not doing a great amount of work, but what's being lost in that are the smaller charities, the small to medium-sized organizations that are making more differences in local communities, are sometimes being left out of those large donation, large bequeath kind of conversations. And that's a trend that does not seem to be going away. In Canada, specifically, there are 75% of all charitable donations go to religion, health, social services, and international organizations. Now that's changing as the younger generation is embracing different kinds of charities, like environmental charities. But those are the stats in terms of giving as we're seeing it now. So the large charities are receiving the lion's share. So if the question is where are state donations going, chances are they're going to the larger, more established charities. And again, not suggesting they're not doing amazing work, but I think there's an opportunity for smaller and medium-sized charities that are more focused around a specific community to do a better job of communicating, like we're doing today, about the value of good giving, giving well, and more intelligent giving, and understanding kind of how that unfolds. This question's popped up again. What do you look for when selecting a financial advisor? We kind of tackled it before. We'll tackle it again. I think from my perspective, you really need to look for somebody whose values you're aligned with. Understanding your goals and your goals and objectives comes first. But then one of the things you want to look at is if you're working with a financial advisor, are they just there to sell you something, or are they to actually provide good advice? It's really hard to decipher sometimes. You can look at credentials, you can look at the firms that people are with. Pick up the phone and call them, I think, or meet with them face to face. You'll get a better sense of whether or not you trust somebody by meeting with them. Credentials are great, but they're not enough. The firm that they work for is great, but they're not enough. Ask for referrals. That's always a good thing. Treat finding a financial advisor the way you treat looking for the next place you're going to go on vacation, right? Spend a little bit of time, energy, research. If you're finding that you've got a referral from a friend, that's a great place to start, because you already have established that there's already a relationship there that you can build some trust on. But the more specific you can be with your needs. So for example, if you were to come, so I have one of my designations is in philanthropy. So if you were to say, I'm really looking for somebody who can help me with my strategic approach to philanthropy, you might want to look for people that specialize in that. On the other hand, if you are an accountant, let's say you're a dentist, and you want to look for somebody who has a specialty of working with dentists and the specifics of the dental profession, you might want to look for those individuals. So I would just say there's no easy answer, because at the end of the day, the relationship you have with your accountant, your lawyer, your financial professionals, hopefully these are relationships that last a long period of time, and they have to be built around trust. And the only way you get to know and trust somebody is by breaking bread with them.
Well, thank you, Craig and Bill, for the wonderful information. I'm going to intervene as moderator. The panel has been doing a great job moderating the questions. As a lawyer, I just wanted to chime in on a couple of previous questions and add my 2 cents. With respect to the question about many children and planning your will and asset distribution, one thing I would just point out is you should take into account the possibility that one of your children predeceases you. And this can sometimes get complicated, where if the child predeceases and they themselves have children who are minors or underage, then the public guardian and trustee can get involved. So it's very important to carefully plan how what will happen in case one of the children do predecease. As unpleasant as it is to think about that possibility, it's one thing that you should do. Another comment that I had, there was a question about whether the family lawyer can act as an executor. And this is not my area of practice, for example, but I know just from practicing law for 15 years that we do see family lawyers sometimes step up and take on this role if they feel comfortable and if they're prepared to take on the duties and responsibilities that would entail. Now, I have a question for our speakers. how often should families review and update their will and estate plans? Craig, what do you think about this question?
More often than they are. You know, the general advice would say you should always make sure that it's up to date. But what does that mean? I think good practice would be to look at it. I would say it's best if you look at it once a year, but I'm a human as well. But let's say working with a financial professional to put it on the calendar to make sure that those documents are reviewed every 2 or 3 years. And here's the magic words, or when something significant happens. So just as Yuri, if you said if a child were to predecease you, that's the trigger that you should be updating your will, or at least looking at your will again. If an executor dies, that's the trigger that you should be updating your will. But we're busy and sometimes things happen and we forget. And that's why having some kind of a regularity to the schedule, even if has anything changed this year that requires us to update your will, if the answer is no, at least there's a trigger that gets people thinking about it. So it's not a bad idea just to talk about it at least once a year. Doesn't mean it needs to be updated, but it should be updated when something material changes.
Yeah, I'll add to that. We see this all the time. One of the when an event occurs in a family for an individual, a birth, a death, a separation, a divorce, something like that. That's the opportunity to actually take a hard look at what was planned, what was envisioned then, and what needs to be changed now. I can't tell you how many people I encounter in my travels. That one of the questions, other than talking about the organization and what the organization aims to achieve, I always ask the question of them, do you have a current will? Because if we're going to be getting into a conversation around any type of charitable gifting, that they should, if they don't have a current will, they're not prepared themselves to make some sort of a larger financial contribution and outlay. So having the will is a good starting point. It doesn't mean that they have to wait to die to make the contribution, but it's a starting point for them to have peace of mind, and that they have taken all of the considerations into place, that what they need to do for their family, their heirs, their friends, their own lifestyle. And then maybe they'll be doing something now and planting the seed towards something greater down the road.
Thank you for that, Bill and Craig. I'm just going to ask if anyone has any final questions to please enter them in the question and answer button on your Zoom screen. Let me just ask another question, which is, Craig, you talked a little bit about giving now versus giving later. And how can someone make that determination about whether they should give now or give later?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a couple of ways I look at it. The first thing is can the individual afford to give now? And that means different things to different people. But what I mean by that is, can they afford to give now, today, without influencing or negatively impacting their lifestyle? That's usually a benchmark that people say is, I don't want to change the way I live. And what we find is that many people have portfolios and they become anchored to the value of the portfolio. And when you do a proper financial plan, you may find that people are very unlikely to outlive their money. And if they're unlikely to outlive their money because they have modest lifestyles or they have large portfolios, then they could actually afford to give money today. So that's part of it. Now, can they afford to give money today by using some simple financial projections or financial planning? The second thing is really having conversations with the charities they want to support and trying to determine, do the charities need money now or do they need money later? Some charities are maybe, a hospital foundation may be raising money for a specific piece of equipment. They need the money now. And so that may influence how people approach their giving decisions. But,
Can I jump in?
Want to do it? Yeah, just okay. What we want to do, Bill, before you get in, I think we're going to echo the same things. Is we want to make sure that if people are giving to causes that are important to them, that they receive the benefit in terms of not necessarily recognition, but they know that their hard work and the assets they've accumulated over a lifetime are going to the causes that they want to do that. And sometimes that's easier to do while you're alive because you get to see the benefit immediately.
Yeah, the giving now and giving later scenarios are they kind of they fit nicely together. But giving now is usually triggered by an event, and that event happens to be something that will trigger a taxable capital gain. So the best and smartest ways to give now is if you are going to be selling something. If you're going to be selling a mutual fund, if you're going to be selling a shares in a company, if you're selling a business, if you are selling a piece of property that has a taxable capital gain associated with it. These are all areas that you can reduce the tax that you're going to be paying by making a charitable contribution as a result of it. And that is on the giving now side. It is a really it's a much more beneficial way to be taking that approach and having that conversation around, well, if I'm going to be giving X number of dollars in taxation, I'm going to have to pay it anyway. How can I be benefiting as a result of it? And my donation will probably cost me, if not half, less than half of what it would cost if I were to be making it with after-tax dollars, like cash, putting it on your credit card, writing a check, or anything along those lines.
Well, that's very very helpful. Thank you, Bill. I'm mindful of the time. We're almost at the end of our time. What I wanted to do at this time is to, unless there are any final questions, thank all of our speakers and our participants. I wanted to make sure that everyone knows that we will be sending a survey about this webinar right after the session closes. Please provide your feedback. We really encourage you to do that because it helps us develop the content and future webinars. I wanted to also give pass along a note that our next webinar in our series is entitled Gracious Aging, and it's currently scheduled for November 19th. So watch for information at the beginning of November. So once again, please join me in thanking Mr. Bill Petruk and Mr. Craig Swistoon. Their contact information is available on the screen. And thank you very much for a very enjoyable session.
Thank you, Yuri. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Yuri. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Have a great day.
Thanks.